The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class, and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Miss Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
Morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be program. Mr. Willie Walker Jr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mother Nell Norma Hooks Ford of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mother Bertha Louise Lester, age 105, of Byron, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran, Mr. Henry Jr. from Georgia and America's Thomas of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mother Willeen of Bryant of Cordele. The family of United States Army veteran, Deacon Wayward Dempsey of Cordele, Georgia. Of United States Army, Mr. Sarabian Smith, Cordele, Georgia. Would like to thank our friends, our expressions of sympathy shown to them under our and bereavement during the past week. Mr. Willie Walker Jr., age 70, of 1313 East Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, September 6th, at the Cordele Health and Rehabilitation in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Willie Walker Jr., age 78, was held Sunday, September 11th, at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Portico in Cordele, Georgia. His beloved cousin, the Reverend Kenneth A. Tooks Sr., officiated. The burial followed at the Pleasant Hill Baptist Church Cemetery, Hatley Community, Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Mr. Sebastian Walker and his wife, Mrs. Carol Walker of Cordele, Georgia. Marquita James and her husband, Mr. Demetrius James of Dallas. Miss Shaquita Walker of Tuskegee, Alabama, and Mr. Reginald Freeman. 6 beloved grandchildren, Miss Keandra Clark, Miss Shawana Hill, Mr. Demetrius James III, Miss Amber Hampton, Mr. Van Denard, and Miss Gwen Pittman. A host of great-grandchildren, his loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Louise Payne Smith of Cleveland, Ohio, Mrs. Ruthie Lander of Macon, Georgia, Miss Bernice Westbrook and her husband Sadara Westbrook of Long Beach, California, his beloved brothers, Mr. Freddie Walker and his wife, Mrs. Julia May Walker of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Carl Walker and his wife, Mrs. Elaine Walker of Corona, California, and Mr. Ulysses Walker and his wife, Mrs. Betty Walker of Cordele, Georgia. A brother-in-law, Mr. Raymond Williams of Las Vegas, Nevada. A beloved aunt, Mrs. Estella Walker Ray of Decatur, Georgia. His beloved former wife, Mrs. Elaine Walker of Cordele, Georgia. A host of devoted nieces, nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Willie Walker Jr., age 78, of 1313 East 8th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Beloved church mother, Mother Nell Norma Hooks Ford, age 83, of 2114 Doris Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, August 31st, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for beloved church mother, Mother Nell Norma Hooks Ford, age 83, was held Sunday, September 11th, at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Portico in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, officiated. The burial followed at the Westview Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving goddaughter, Miss Lizzie Hooks of Cordele, Georgia, her loving sibling, Mr. Joe Hooks of Americus, Georgia, Mrs. Elizabeth Hooks Cross of Albany, Georgia, Mrs. Sarah Hooks Pridgeon of Daytona Beach, Florida, her beloved sisters-in-law, Mrs. Orly Ford and Mrs. Annabelle Heath, both of Brooklyn, New York. Her special nieces and nephews, Miss Lakeisha Law, Miss Amy Lee Hooks, Miss Janice Ford, and Mr. Kerry Cross, all of Cordele, Georgia. Miss Shirley Hooks of Sylvester, Georgia. Miss Mona Brown of Daytona Beach, Florida. Mr. Jasper Hooks of Tussle, Oklahoma. And Mr. Rufus Brown of Houston, Texas. A host of beloved cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mother Nell Norma Hooks Ford, age 83, beloved church mother of 2114 Doris Street, Cordele, Georgia. Beloved church mother of the Byram Chapel CME Church of Byramville, Georgia, Mother Bertha Louise Lester, age 105, of 360 Church Avenue, Byramville, Georgia, died Sunday, September 4th, at her residence in Byramville, Georgia. The funeral service for beloved church mother, Mother Bertha Louise Lester, age 105, was held Tuesday, September 13th, on the grounds of the Bay Point CME Church in Byramville, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Mary Scott, pastor of the Byram Chapel CME Church, officiated. The burial followed in the churchyard cemetery. Survivors include 11 and devoted children, Mrs. Mary Harmon of Macon, Georgia, Miss Lucy Lester of Byronville, Georgia, Mr. Johnny Bennett Lester, and her husband, Mr. John Lester of Florence, South Carolina, Mrs. Patricia Matthews and her husband, Dr. Horace Matthews of Allendale, South Carolina, Miss Pamela Lester of Detroit, Michigan, Miss Verlene Lester of Riverdale, Georgia, and Dr. Army Lester and his wife, Mrs. Etta Lester of Kennesaw, Georgia. 14 beloved grandchildren, 19 great-grandchildren, 4 great-great-grandchildren, many nieces and nephews, a host of cousins and friends to include Mrs. Paulette Hooper, Mr. Kenneth Lester, Mr. Roosevelt Lester, Mrs. Lucille Caldwell Frazier, and a host of other relatives and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Beloved church mother of the Byram Chapel CME Church in Byronville, Georgia, Mother Bertha Louise Lester, age 105, of 360 Church Avenue, Byronville, Georgia. United States Army veteran, Mr. Henry Wallace Cleckley Jr., age 69, of 808 Citron Drive, Byram, Georgia, formerly of Americus, Georgia, died Thursday, September 8th at the Atrium Health Navison Peach Medical Center in Byram, Georgia. Funeral service for United States Army veteran Mr. Henry Wallace Cleckley Jr., age 69, was held Thursday, September 15th, in the sanctuary of the Friendship Baptist Church in Americus, Georgia. Bishop Melvin McCluster, pastor, his beloved son, the Reverend Henry Cleckley III, officiated. The burial with military honors followed at the Andersonville National Memorial Cemetery in Andersonville, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Arlinia Cleckley of Byram, Georgia, his loving and devoted children, Mr. Dedrick Cleckley and his wife, Mrs. Tamika Cleckley of Atlanta, Georgia, the Reverend Henry Cleckley III and his wife, Mrs. Taisha Cleckley of Jacksonville, Arkansas, Mrs. Shakita Cleckley of Macon, Georgia, Mr. Kelvin Brown and his wife, Mrs. Takesha Brown, and Mr. Keith Brown. 12 beloved grandchildren, his loving and devoted sisters, Miss Beverly Rawls, Miss Linda Rawls, both of Americus, Georgia, Mrs. Cynthia Hinton of Alexandria, Virginia, his beloved brothers, Mr. Maurice Cleckley and Mr. Milton Cleckley, both of Americus, Georgia, his beloved aunt, Mrs. Carrie Baisden Varner of Atlanta, Georgia, and Miss Rosa May Clemens of Americus, Georgia, a host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, to include Mr. Tommy Jackson of Americus, Georgia, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. United States Army veteran Mr. Henry Wallace Cleckley Jr., age 69, of 808 Citron Drive, Byram, Georgia, formerly of Americus, Georgia. Deacon Causey Lee Thomas age 72, of 802 South 5th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, September 10th, at his residence in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Deacon Kazi Lee Thomas, age 72, was held Thursday, September 15th, at the A.S. Clark Auditorium on the M.D. White's Medical Institute campus in Cordele, Georgia. His beloved nephew, the Reverend Emmanuel Brown, officiated. The burial followed at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Minister Vernell Staley Thomas of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved and devoted children, Mr. Cedric Quarterman and his wife, Mrs. Betty Quarterman of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Kazi L. Harvey and his wife, Mrs. Jacqueline Harvey of Miami, Florida, Miss Felicia Edwards and her husband, Mr. Lee Edwards, Mr. Carlton Thomas, both of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Edward B. Staley of Perry, Georgia, Miss Tammy Harvey, and Mr. Ernest B. Harvey and his wife, Mrs. Bridget Harvey of Kathleen, Georgia, Miss Carla Butts and her husband, Mr. Wayne Butts of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Tion Harvey of Warner Robins, Georgia, 9 beloved grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren, his beloved brother, Mr. Oscar L. Thomas of Jacksonville, Florida, a devoted sister, Miss Irma Jean Johnson of Cordele, Georgia, his son-in-law, Mr. Darren Williams of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved sisters-in-law, Mrs. Sandra Jackson and Mrs. Florine Harrell and her husband, Mr. Billy Harrell, his brother-in-law, Mr. Michael Staley, and his wife, Mrs. Louise Staley, a host of beloved nieces and nephews, to include a special niece and caregiver, Ms. Brenda Stretchen of Cordele, Georgia, a host of cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survived Deacon Kazi Thomas, age 72, of 802 South 5th Street, Cordele, Georgia. Mother Willeen Breedlove Bryant, age 91, of 309 West 29th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, September 9th, at her residence in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother Willeen Breedlove Bryant, age 91, was held Saturday, September 17th, at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Portico in Cordele, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Jesse Watts, pastor of the Piney Grove Baptist Church, officiated. The burial followed at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Dr. Deacon Johnny Bryant Jr. of Jacksonville, Florida, Mr. Charles Hawkins of Miami, Florida, Mr. Roy Hawkins and his wife, Mrs. Jackie Hawkins, Mr. Eddie J. Bryant and his wife, Mrs. Mary Bryant, Miss Dorothy Bryant, and Mr. Lord Bridges and his wife, Mrs. Deborah Bridges, all of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Betty J. Bryant of California, and Mr. Tony O. Bryant of Cordele, Georgia. 22 beloved grandchildren, 22 great-grandchildren, 2 great-great-grandchildren, many nieces and nephews, a host of cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survived Mother Willeen Breedlove Bryant, age 91, of 309 West 29th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. United States Army veteran Deacon Wayward Dempsey, age 73, of 1902 South 13th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, September 10th at his residence in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for United States Army veteran Deacon Wayward Dempsey, age 73, was held Saturday, September 17th in the sanctuary of the Beulah Land Baptist Church in Cordele, Georgia. Dr. Dwayne L. Daniels, pastor, his pastor, the Reverend Gregory Williams, pastor of the Emmanuel Baptist Church, officiated. The burial with military honors followed at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his devoted fiancée, Miss Leslie Bell of Cordele, Georgia, his loving and devoted son, Mr. Rico Dempsey, and his wife, Mrs. Angela Dempsey of Brandywine, Maryland. A beloved niece whom he regarded as a daughter, Mrs. Tish Bivens, and her wife, Mrs. Yolanda Bivens of Nashville, Georgia. 3 beloved grandsons, 3 loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Janie Miller, Mrs. Carol Nadine Dempsey, both of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Brenda Sellers of Jacksonville, Florida. 3 devoted brothers, Mr. Harry Dempsey Sr. of Chester, Pennsylvania, Mr. Alfred Dempsey of Byram, Georgia, and Mr. Columbia Shallow of Jacksonville, Florida. A host of devoted nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include his former co-workers, his beloved classmates, and his beloved Emmanuel Missionary Baptist Church family, survived United States Army veteran Deacon Wayward Dempsey, age 73, of 1902 South 13th Street, Cordele, Georgia. United States Army veteran Mr. Sarabian Smith, age 67, of 810 West 19th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Sunday, September 11th at his residence in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his beloved wife, Mrs. Margaret Smith, a beloved daughter, Miss Sabrina D. Smith of Denmark, a beloved and devoted sister, Miss Elaine Walker of Cordele, Georgia, a host of beloved nieces and nephews, to include Mr. Raphael Davis of Norfolk, Virginia, host of cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, survive United States Army veteran Mr. Sarabian Smith, age 67, of 810 West 19th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Again, the family of Mr. Willie Walker Jr. of Cordele, Georgia, the family of beloved church mother, Mother Nell Norman Hook Ford of Cordele, Georgia, the family of beloved church mother of the Byram Chapel CME Church of Byramville, Georgia, Mother Bertha Louise Lester, age 105 of Byramville, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran Mr. Henry Wallace Cleckley Jr. of Byram, Georgia, and Americus, Georgia. The family of Deacon Causey Lee Thomas of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mother Willeen Breedlove Bryant of Cordele, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran Deacon Wayward Dempsey of Cordele, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran Mr. Sarabian Smith of Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcement. Mr. Willie James Cantrell, age 71, of 821 Wellhouse Drive, Jacksonville, Florida, formerly of Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, September 13th, at Baptist South Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Audrey M. Cantrell of Jacksonville, Florida, a loving and devoted daughter, Miss Sabrina Francis, and her husband, Mr. Kelvin Francis of Orange Park, Florida. Two beloved grandchildren, Miles and Layla, his beloved brothers, Mr. James L. Cantrell of River Beach, Florida, the elder L.C. Cantrell of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Sammy Cantrell of Patterson, New Jersey, and Mr. John Cantrell of Sarasota, Florida. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mr. Aaron Wallace and his wife, Mrs. May Wallace of Cordele, Georgia, Mrs. Annie Evil Wallace, and Mrs. Carlton Wallace, both of Vienna, Georgia. His brothers-in-law, Mr. Augusta Means of Sparta, Georgia, Mr. Carl Means of Jacksonville, Florida, and Mr. Eugene Thomas of Statham, Georgia. His sisters-in-law, Mrs. Mozella Cantrell of River Beach, Florida, Miss Lavinia Cantrell of Port St. Lucie, Florida, Miss Yolanda Cantrell of Atlanta, Georgia, Missionary Irene Cantrell of Cordele, Georgia, Mrs. Deanne Cantrell of Patterson, New Jersey, Mrs. Sheila Cantrell of Sarasota, Florida, Mrs. Dorothy Thomas of Statham, Georgia, and Mrs. Willie Mean Dexter of Cordele, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Willie James Cantrell, age 71, of 821 Wellhouse Drive, Jacksonville, Florida. The funeral service for Mr. Willie James Cantrell, age 71, will be held Saturday, September 24th at 10 a.m. at the A.S. Clark Auditorium on the M.D. White's Medical Institute campus in Cordele, Georgia, with the minister selected officiating. The burial will follow at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Charles Jonathan Toots, age 45, of 709 Sunset Drive, Americus, Georgia, died Thursday, September 15th at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted mother, Miss Annie Toots of Americus, Georgia, his companion, Miss Lisa Werburn of Americus, Georgia, his beloved stepchildren, Cameron Werburn, Dion Werburn, Mila Werburn, and Shamir Werburn, all of Americus, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Logan Toots, and his wife, Mrs. Sharon Toots of Americus, Georgia. A beloved sister, Miss Ann Dean of Americus, Georgia. A host of beloved cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Charles Jonathan Toots, age 45, of 709 Sunset Drive, Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Charles Jonathan Toots, age 45, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral arrangements needs, and whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
And now for our announcements. You're invited to worship with the Greater Mars Tabernacle Baptist Church. You may join them via Facebook Live this morning beginning at 9 o'clock a.m. You may join them for Tuesday midday prayer conference beginning at 12 o'clock noon. Thursday prayer meeting and Bible study at 6 o'clock p.m. The call-in number for the conference call is 229-329-7611. Again, that number is 229-329-7611. Deacon Arthur L. Park is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. Everyone has a cordial invitation to worship at the St. King Baptist Church today. You may join them for their morning worship service that begins at 10:15 a.m. Reverend Woody Burnham is the pastor. The Mount Zion First African Baptist Church extends a cordial invitation for you to worship with them via conference call Sunday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Prayer Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 o'clock noon. Bible study is held each Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. The call-in number is 339-209-6419. Deacon Joe Wedges is chairman of deacons. Dr. Dan James III is the pastor. The Gethsemane Baptist Church extends a cordial invitation for everyone to worship with them during this worship service today, beginning at 10:30 a.m. Mother Mary S. Butler is the church mother. Deacon Johnny Wilson is chairman of deacons. Reverend Cecil Straughter is the pastor. The New Oak Grove Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them each Sunday for Sunday school beginning at 9:15 a.m. Worship service begins at 10 o'clock a.m. First face covering is required. Deacon Alonzo Jones is chairman of deacons. Reverend W.W. Wilson is the pastor. The McAfee Grove Baptist Church, located Highway 19 North in Leesburg, invites everyone to worship with them for their family night worship services beginning at Tuesday at 7 o'clock p.m., small class study Thursdays at 7 o'clock p.m., Sunday morning worship service at 9 o'clock a.m. You may join them using the number 425-436-6341. The access code is 708058. Again, that number is 425-436-6341. The access code is 708058. Reverend Dr. Robert L. Morgan Sr. is the pastor. Hope in the Word Ministries Fall Revival will begin on Saturday, September 24th at 4 o'clock p.m. Bishop Arthur Fulton will be the guest minister. Everyone has a cordial invitation to worship with the members of Hope in the Word Ministries during their fall revival services. Pastor Calvin and Minister Melissa Hagebrooks, pastors. The Wilcox County Head Start offers free child development services for eligible families with children ages 3 to 5. For more information, please contact Mrs. Donna Jenkins at 229-365-2341 or 478-922-4464. The Historical Awards Committee will be donating a gift to church mothers of the church in September in place of the pre-Mother's Day luncheon. To receive the gift, we ask that you will contact Deacon Tommy Ford Jr. at 229-417-0324. Mr. Cleveland Lemons at 229-938-6838. Mr. Johnny Dennis at 229-322-8163. Or Deacon John Wiggins at 229-712-0136. Mr. Paul Atkins would like to announce that his book of poems, Never a Dull Moment, is on sale now at Amazon. For more information, you may contact Mr. Atkins at 229-406-3489. Everyone has a cordial invitation to worship at the Mount Calvary Baptist Church today. Morning worship service begins at 10:30 a.m. You're cordially invited. They extend a cordial invitation for you to worship with them during the annual Mission Day service, which will be held on Sunday, September 24th. Mrs. Faye Patrick Luster will be the guest speaker for the mission anniversary. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. Mother Evelyn Lewis, church mother, Deacon Leon Spears, chairman of deacons, Reverend Isaac H. Owens is the pastor. As we continue this morning, we would like to remind you of some upcoming information regarding the upcoming elections that will be taking place. So we do ask that as we share this information with you, that you will bear it in mind and prepare yourselves for the upcoming elections that we have in our area for the state of Georgia and local elections as well. October the 11th will be the last day for a person to register and be eligible to vote in the November general election and runoff election. October the 11th is the last day for a person to register and be eligible to vote in the November general election and runoff election. We urge you to take advantage of this opportunity to check your voter registration to make sure that you are registered to vote in the precinct in your area, and to make sure if you have moved at any time, you have made sure you have updated your voter information. October the 11th is the last day for a person who plans on voting in the upcoming November election to register to vote. October 17th, early voting will begin. Early voting will begin on October 17th and continue throughout. Saturday voting will be available on October 22nd. We do ask that you will bear all these announcements in mind, and we will continue to update you with upcoming information regarding the upcoming elections. This concludes our announcements for this morning.
And now for dedication. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: in loving memory of Mr. Warren Clay, who would have celebrated his birthday September 13th. Dedication requested by his beloved children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, the entire Clay and Bivens family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mother Carrie L. Clay, who would have celebrated her birthday September 15th. Dedication requested by her beloved daughter, Mother Edna Clay, her beloved grandchildren, and the entire family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mr. Willie Junior Davis, who departed this life September 18, 1990. Dedication requested by Mrs. Mary Frances Davis and the entire family. Precious memory lingers still. In loving memory of Mr. S.T. Napper Sr., who would have celebrated his birthday September 18. Dedication requested by Mrs. Brenda and Mr. Richard Cross and the entire Bullock family. Gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Miss Stella Jones, who would have celebrated her birthday September 19. Dedication requested by her beloved sons, Dewey and Robert, her beloved and devoted sister, Miss Dorothy Rose Jones, and the entire family. Gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Dr. Erskine R. Weaver, who departed this life September 19, 2017. Dedication requested by his beloved family. Our first selection this morning is dedicated following. Happy wedding anniversary to the Reverend Donnie R. Hall Sr. and Sister Amanda Hall, who celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary Wednesday, September 14. Dedication requested by their beloved children, grandchildren, and the entire Hall family and the staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Happy wedding anniversary to the Reverend Donnie R. Hall Sr. Amanda Hall celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary Wednesday, September 14. God continue to bless your union and keep it strong. Happy wedding anniversary to Mr. Scotty and Miss Yolanda Grant. Celebrated their anniversary Thursday, September 15. Dedication requested by their son, Christian, and the entire Killen, Smith, and Grant family. Happy wedding anniversary to Mr. Scotty and Miss Yolanda Grant on Thursday, September 15. God continue to bless your union. Our first selection this morning goes out to the following. Special birthday wishes goes out to Cordial Chief of Police, Chief Augusta Telfair, who's celebrating his birthday today, Sunday, September 18. Dedication request by all of his children and the entire family. Happy birthday, City of Cordial Chief Fire Chief Augusta Telfair, who's celebrating his birthday today. Cordial City Fire Chief. And happy birthday to Mrs. Tommy Glenn, who celebrates her birthday on Tuesday, September 13th. Dedication requested by her husband, Mr. Joseph Glenn, and the entire family, and Mrs. Mary Frances Davis. Special birthday wishes goes out to Brother Lonnie Barrett of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, who celebrated his birthday Friday, September 16th. Dedication requested by the entire Barrett family, members of the Davis Chapel CME Church of Arabi, Georgia, and the management and staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Happy birthday to Brother Lonnie Barrett, and many, many more. Happy birthday to Mr. Dewey Jones, who celebrated his birthday Saturday, September 17th. Dedication requested by his beloved aunt, Miss Dorothy Rose Jones. Happy birthday to Mrs. Martha Lester Harris of Durham, North Carolina, who is celebrating her birthday today, September 18th. Dedication requested by the entire Lester and Harris family. Happy birthday to little Poppy Ruth Muhammad, who is celebrating her birthday today, September 18th. Dedication requested by her beloved grandparents, Deacon Kenneth and Sister Shanita Grace, and the entire family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Juanita Montford, who will celebrate her birthday Monday, September 19. Dedication requested by her beloved children, grandchildren, and the entire Montford family. Happy birthday to Miss Latasha Cookie Smith, who will celebrate her birthday Monday, September 19. Dedication requested by the Smith, Lawton, and Epps family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Brenda Napa Cross, who will celebrate her birthday Monday, September 19. Dedication requested by her beloved husband, Mr. Richard Cross, her beloved mother-in-law, Deacon S. Martha Ann Cross, and the entire Cross, Graham, and Napa family. Happy birthday to Miss Brenda Napa Cross, my classmate. God bless you. Happy birthday to Sister Juanita Talbot, who will celebrate her birthday Monday, September 19th. Dedication requested by her beloved children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and her church family, the Greater Marsh Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, her pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, Deacon Tommy Ford, and the entire membership and usher board says, happy birthday to Ms. Juanita Talbot, who will celebrate her birthday Monday, September 19. Our first election this morning is dedicated to the following: Deacon James Smith and family, Mother Etna Clay and family, Mother Ida Bell Patrick and family, Mother Minnie Fletcher and family, Mr. Ricky Hardeman and family, Miss Annette Stembridge and family, Mr. Philip Stembridge and family, Mrs. Willie Mae Leary and family of Hatley, Georgia, Ms. Lucille Hillman and family of Ashburn, Georgia, Miss Deaconess Carrie Brooks and family, Miss Geraldine Pickens and family, Miss Minnie Jackson and family, Mrs. Willie Mae Crapp and family, Mrs. Charlotte West and family, Miss Sandra Faye Green and family, Pastor Lamar and Minister Sharon Thomas and family, Mrs. Valerie Mercer Ross and family, Mr. Jerome and Mrs. Maggie Green and family, Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Lee Mercer and family, Miss Annette Putman and family, Mrs. Daphne Henderson and family, Mrs. Janie Miller and family, Mrs. Mary Trahan and family, Mrs. Ethel Jones and family, Mrs. Eddie Mae Gaston and family, Mr. A.B. and Miss Valerie Levant and family, Mrs. Eddie Mae Graper and family, Deacon James and Dr. Elizabeth Maddox and family, Mrs. Gail Chanel and family, Miss Lakeisha Smith and family, Miss Rena Beal and family, Commissioner Vesta Beal and the entire Beal family, Mrs. Annie Jones and family, Mrs. Carolyn Levant and family, the Reverend Dion and Miss Cynthia Jones and family, Deaconess Connie James and family, Mrs. Dorothy Rose Jones and family, Mrs. Nairobia Levant and family, Mrs. Annie Mae Smith and family, Miss Shaquita Woodson and family, Mother Leela Honey Smith and family, Mrs. Betty Levant and family, Mrs. Juanita Montford and family, Mr. Jerry Lewis and family, Ms. Verdell Butts and family, Mrs. Shirley Epps and family, Ms. Val Carter and family, Mrs. Sandra Jackson and family, Ms. Patricia White and family, Mr. Andrew Jackson and family, Mrs. Barbara Joe Roberts and family, Mr. Derek Carter and family, Ms. Val Carter and family, Ms. Corrine Passmore and family, Mrs. Jackie Lattimore and family, Mrs. Janice Bush and family, Mr. Sean Hutchins and family, Miss Selma Jackson and family, Mr. F.D. Lawton and family, Mr. Lonnie Williams and family, the Williams family, Miss Lois Reynolds and family, Missionary Irene Cantrell and family, Miss Geraldine Perry and family, Miss Bernice Relaford and family, Miss Mary Wellens and family, the Armstrong family, Mrs. Frances Relaford and family, Mrs. Shirley Faye Green and family, the Mobley family, Mrs. Lottie Tarbert and family, Mrs. Essie Gay and family, Mrs. Gwen Henderson and family, Mrs. Eddie Ruth White and family, the Fullwood family, missionary Ola Mike and family, Mother Lenora McNeil and family, Mrs. Mary Frances Davis and family, Miss Katrina Davis and family, Miss Naisha Davis and family, Miss LaShondra Donaldson and family, Mr. Justin Colbert and family, Mrs. Thelma Brown and family, Miss Burrow Patrick and family, Miss Mary Taylor and family, Mother Willeen McGill and family, Miss Nebby Cross and family, Mr. Judge and Mrs. Tommy Glenn. And again, happy birthday to Mother Tommy Glenn, Mrs. Lavetta Fields and family, Miss Mashonda Holmes and family, Miss Sasha White and family. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcement. With Trail, Florida, died Tuesday, September 13th at the Baptist South Hospital in Jacksonville, Florida. The funeral service for Mr. Willie James Cantrell, age 71, will be Saturday, September 24th at 10 a.m. at the A.S. Clark Auditorium on the M.D. White's Medical Institute campus in Cordele, Georgia, with the minister selected officiating. The burial will follow at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Charles Jonathan Tukes, age 45, of 709 Sunset Drive, Americus, Georgia, died Thursday, September 15th at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Charles Jonathan Tukes, age 45, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our next and final selection for this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of Mr. Willie Walker Jr. of Cordele, Georgia, the family of beloved church mother, Mother Nell Norman Hooks Ford of Cordele, Georgia, the family of beloved church mother of the Byram Chapel CME Church of Byramville, Georgia, Mother Bertha Louise Lester of Byramville, Georgia, the family of United States Army veteran Mr. Henry Wallace Cleckley Jr. of Byram, Georgia, and Americus, Georgia, the family of Deacon Carsey Lee Thomas of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mother Willeen Breedlove Bryant of Cordele, Georgia, the family of United States Army veteran Deacon Wayward Dempsey of Cordele, Georgia, the family of United States Army veteran Mr. Sarabian Smith of Cordele, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to the bereaved will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Mr. Willie James Cantrell of Jacksonville, Florida, the family of Mr. Charles Jonathan Tukes of Americus, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to all of the sick and shut-in, all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in our armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all veterans, and to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure. Program goes out in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams, to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, to my son, Jai Wilkerson Parker, to my mother-in-law, Mrs. Billy Ann Hall, and family. This selection goes out to my sister, Mrs. Patsy Jackson, and her husband, Mr. Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia. To my brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, and his wife, Dr. Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter of Vienna, Georgia, and to their grandson, Noble. This election is dedicated to my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith, program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church, our pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, to his wife, Sister Kathy Williams, and family, entire Williams family of Cordele and Albany, Georgia. Goes out to their son, the Reverend Christopher Williams, pastor of the Antioch Baptist Church of Cuthbert, Georgia. This election goes out to our dear friend, Mrs. Cheryl Cobb Henry and family of Americus, Georgia, to Deacon, to Trustee Aletha Askew, trustee and of the New Oak Grove Baptist Church here in Cordele, Georgia. This election goes out to Mr. Cleveland R. Lemon, oldest staff member of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home and steward of the Bethel CME Church here in Cordele, Georgia. To my niece, Mrs. Vera Mathis, and family, to Mrs. Rosalind Porter and family. And again, to each and everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. To Ms. Easter May Sanders and family, Mr. George and Mrs. Annette Felton and family, and Ms. Kimberly Felton and family. And again, to each and everyone who listens to our program, God bless you.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. And remember, in your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
Some of these days